good piece of potatoes. They're level and look as if they've got any amount of vigour about them. But you're probably thinking, but I bet they're on a good bit of land. Well, so they are, but they wouldn't be looking like that if the land hadn't been fed well and worked well, and if a lot of care hadn't been put into the business right through. Well, that's a fair start, at any rate. It's clover land. The first crop's been cut, and the second crop's going to be ploughed in. We should most of us think that was a fair preparation in itself, but there's a good coat of muck going on as well. You can't always put potatoes after ploughed in clover, but if it must be after corn stubble, then the stubble really wants a good coat of farmyard manure. Now that's something like a plough, but you'll be thinking that wouldn't be much use on my land, too heavy or too near the rock. Well, let's see the thing at work. There's no mistake about it, that is splendid land, and perhaps ours would never look quite like that. And yet, those fields where we generally put the potatoes are fairly deep soil, and that is certainly the way to get a great depth of mould for the potatoes to grow in. And he's not satisfied with ploughing a foot deep. He has a subsoiling time down behind as well. Those two together make some of our 4 or 5 inch ploughing look a bit silly. And if you can't go all the way, you will admit that a big deep furrow like that lays the land just right for the winter, and by the spring it needs very little working at all. Mind you, that land wouldn't be so good if it weren't ploughed early. That piece of clover land we saw was being ploughed in September, and we can't all be at it then, because we're often still too busy with harvest. But it's no use putting off this deep ploughing until the bad weather comes along. And once it's ploughed, it wants leaving alone till the spring. Now that's the seed coming in already, and at the proper time too. There's a lot more to be done in the autumn about potato growing besides just getting the land ploughed. It's no use leaving the seed question until a few days before it's time to plant. If you do, perhaps you'll get put off with any kind of rubbish that doesn't even look as though it would grow. And remember that a good deal of seed that looks good isn't really good at all, because in the parent stock that it came from, there were many plants badly infected with the crippling and stunting virus diseases. It's best to go in for Scotch or Irish seed, or English or Welsh certified. But you can generally rely on the ordinary English Class 1 once-grown seed, provided it comes from a grower who knows his job and who's in a good seed-growing district. That's the best way to store them, stacked in trays, in specially built chitting houses. But I'm afraid they're beyond most of us. Generally, it'll be more a case of putting the seed into a clamp or a pit for the winter. There's quite a bit in this chitting business, though. Great, long, lanky white sprouts are no good. You want stout green ones, about 1 inch long. Now for the real start towards getting the seed into the land, in March or mid-April, when the land has got dry enough inside to be really fit to work. Don't wait till the land's dried out, because potatoes want moisture to start them as well as other plants. It's not an onion bed that you want, but you must have a good depth of tilth. So twice over with the cultivator should do the trick. But farming doesn't go according to the book, and sometimes the clods are big and hard. Then a heavy set of harrows behind the cultivator is what's wanted, and everything's ready for the ridger. A great lot of potato ridging is done this way now with a row crop tractor. And those ridges form the framework of the whole potato growing business. They're the lines, if you like, down which the other cultivations are going to run. There's a 3-row ridger at work with horses. Some of the old horsemen can do splendid work with one of those tools. They can show you the shortest way across the field, dead straight, those rows are. And there's no reason why the ridges drawn with an ordinary single-furrow potato plough shouldn't be as straight. You'll see that there are quite a few clods in that seed bed, but they won't hurt, provided they're not as hard as bricks, and there's plenty of fine mould in amongst them. But those ridges don't want to lie open a long while, or they'll get dried right through, and the potatoes will have nothing but dried out earth round about them. As soon as ridging has got a good start, someone can begin to cart out the fertilizer onto the headlands ready for the distributors. Most of it's put on in this way nowadays, though a lot of good growers who are beginning to use mechanical potato planters sow their fertilizers on the top of the land and work them in before ridging and planting starts. But however it's put on, potatoes must have a good dose of fertilizer even if the land has been mucked. Because of the war, we've been cut down to half a ton of National Compound Number 1. But these people would be putting on up to 3/4 of a ton in normal times. They evidently do things in a big way here, using 2 distributors. You can sow the fertilizer by hand if you like. And if you do, half the work's saved if you take the trouble to set the bags out at their proper distances about the field. If you want to, you can mix your own fertilizers, using 3 parts of sulfate of ammonia to 4 parts of superphosphate and 2 parts of muriate of potash. Sulfate of potash would be better, but you can't always get it. And you'll be a fair hand at sowing if you can do it as well as this man. He's taking a pride in that job, and isn't that better than just spluttering the stuff on out of an old bucket? When the seed's been chitted, it's best brought out on a trailer onto the field and then have carts to take it down the rows. Of course, if the seed's been stored in a clamp, it will have to be dressed over and put up in 100-weight bags so as to be ready for the planting. In either case, don't forget about frost and the risk of chilling the seed before it's planted. Now, just as with setting out the fertilizers, the trays of potatoes want putting onto the field at their proper distances apart, so that the planters don't have to carry them about a long way. Bags of seed can be set out in the same way, except that, of course, a bag's got in as much as 3 boxes. But the best way with bags is to keep them on the cart, which will go along in front of the planters. There are the women doing the planting and walking backwards so as not to kick the seed. I wouldn't say that was really essential. What's more important is that the whole thing should go with a swing. It would be the same if they were setting bagged stuff, except that they'd be carrying the seed in a basket, one with a rigid handle, so they could, so to speak, use it to walk along with. These potatoes are being covered in with a 3-row coverer. It's a special implement with cotton reel rollers that run along the tops of the ridges. I hate to see the horses walking on the seed, as they're allowed to do on some farms. That one in the middle there, he could do with a bit more education in how to walk on the top of a ridge. Just keep that near side hind foot up, please. Tractor coverers are apt to be a bit on the large side, but they can do splendid work. Look at this one, splitting every ridge dead down the middle. There are various types, and most of them have a small set of covering bodies in the front, and then, to finish the job, the ordinary ridges on the toolbar behind. It won't be every grower that'll agree with this rolling, and no one can say it's as important as some of the cultivations we're going to see in a moment. It's very certain that the roll wants keeping off the land when it's at all wet. But if it's powdery or inclined to be cloddy, rolling will help to keep the ridges from drying out. Potatoes, too, don't want to be under too great a depth of earth. Harrowing will reduce that and kill thousands of weeds into the bargain. You don't want too light a set of harrows, but of course not ones with tines so long that they pull half the potatoes out. That's where you begin to reap the benefit of accurate ridging and covering. If they're done badly, the harrows won't do their work half so well. The weather wants to be right too for this job, and of course it won't kill twitch, only the annual weeds. And then very soon the ridges want drawing out again. It takes some time for potatoes to get rooted to the ground and for the sprouts to poke out through the soil, and the weeds will take advantage of that time unless you keep the soil moving. So this is a good plan, to put the ridges up again about a week or so after the first harrowing. And never let the land rest if you want to keep down the rubbish. After a week or so, when another crop of little weeds has chitted, harrow the ridges down again, and there'll be another massacre of seedlings. The art of cultivating potatoes is the art of having an abundance of loose molds that can be moved about with the harrows and other implements. Well, this is how to get it. 3 tines down a row at a good depth to break up all the land. It's perhaps the most important of all potato cultivations, and though I don't want to rub it in too much, it does so much depend on the ridges being drawn straight and true at the start. If there are thistles, and there often are in potatoes because they like the nice, loose, fertile conditions, then later it will be a good thing to fit blades on the toolbar instead of tines, so as to cut all the land. The same job can be done with a 3-row horse cultivator, or it can be done very well indeed, 1 row at a time, with a scuffler or skerry like this one. And for the first time over, if the land's at all heavy, you may want 2 horses on one of these tools so as to get deep enough. Now that looks like rough treatment, harrowing the potatoes after they're well up. But it does them no harm, and it kills no end of tiny weed seedlings. Some say it makes the potatoes grow better. Then, after the harrowing, the row crop tractor or the scuffler will want to be busy again. Up and down so that there's no hope of any weeds being alive in the spaces between the rows. When all that's been done, hand hoeing shouldn't be a long job. These girls are doing the job very nicely, and it looks to me as if they haven't got many weeds to hoe up anyway. Potatoes don't want chopping about with hoes, especially when the plants are getting big. Now for the last operation in the crop, earthing up. It stops the potatoes getting green at their ends and stops the blight spreading from the tops to the potatoes below. Anyway, if you don't earth up well, your spinner won't go very well later on. And again, it covers over a great number of tiny seedling weeds that would get a lot bigger before lifting day. Like most of the other cultivations, it can be done with tractors or with horses, and if it's done 1 row at a time, it's best to do every other row the first time over, and then bring up the odd rows later when the tops have had time to straighten themselves up. Potato blight, that's the worst disease trouble in potatoes. And if you grow King Edwards or Gladstones or one of those other sorts that take the disease rather badly, you must dust or spray. With Majestics, opinions differ, but the best growers are in favour. Dusting wants doing the first time over just before moulding, then every fortnight through the season. A wet spray needn't be repeated so often. And even with this thorough treatment, the black spots of blight will still appear on the leaves in September. Then, to make a clean job, the potatoes are burnt off with acid or some other burning spray, and the potatoes will be ready for lifting a fortnight later. All potato work should go off with a swing, whether it's ridging or planting or cultivating down the rows, and so should the lifting. But the organization of a potato lifting gang is a big story and must come later on. And then lifting the earlies and the main crops calls for different arrangements. In some parts, all the earlies are dug with forks, but except for the very first liftings, it should generally be possible to use a spinner. So let's have a look at a field of earlies being lifted in this way. Getting a start's quite a job with so many tops to contend with. So it's best to mow a roadway through the field where it's to be opened up. It is possible to start straight in with a spinner, but the tops will be very much in the way, and the potatoes are liable to get covered up and lost. The tops from this mown roadway are best picked up and carted right away, so that everything's clear for a start when the spinner goes down for the first time. Well, here it goes, and the potatoes are all thrown clear on top of the land. Further down, where the pickers are waiting, the weighing machines and the bags are set out to one side of the opening. And for a field as long as this one, you want more than one weigher, or they'll be too far to carry the baskets. Each pair of pickers will be given a length of row called a stint, and when the stint has been picked, the baskets will be carried up to the weighing machine, where there's a man to riddle and bag them up. The very first earlies, with their tender skins, won't of course stand riddling, so they have to go straight into the bags. There's always a bit of a congestion about this first opening, and it's a good plan to harrow up after the first few rows have been cleared. The odd potatoes can then be picked up, and you can get everything ready for a real good start. Now you can bring the weighing machines and the riddling stands out from their temporary places into the middle of the opening, where there's more room to work and more room to stand the bags of potatoes. All these things want thinking about, because there's no fun in having to shift the tackle 2 or 3 times. This spinner's provided with a sharp rim on the near side wheel, so as to cut through any tops that it may happen to run over. The spinner's now got to the edge of the mown roadway and has to spin out the potato plants with their tops on. There's a man walking behind to throw the tops into the middle of the opening so that the pickers can see the potatoes. That will be done each time round, so the tops always lie on land that's been harrowed and cleaned up. As the spinner goes round each time, the women pick their stints and carry the baskets to the man at the riddle. It's generally best to have one riddle between 2 stints. That is, 1 to every 4 pickers. Riddling potatoes and dropping them into hoppers without spilling any wants a good bit of practice. But like so many other things in potato growing, it's a matter of having the riddles, stands and bags set out so that they're handy for the man that's going to use them. There's certainly no muddle about the way this man's doing it. The hand riddles are best for the early job, but when the crop gets heavier, it's best to cart the potatoes to the end of the field and riddle them with a machine. But that wants a different organization altogether, and it's really very similar to lifting the main crops. Well, so much for the ways of growing potatoes and lifting them in the green stage. There are other ways, of course, and some of them less elaborate. But there isn't another crop on the farm that pays better for thinking out the best organization before you start.